we all know that teaching has been challenging or is challenging. And it can be downright difficult because we all face expectations of, you know, a certain number of retention, a certain number of people passing, accreditation, expectations from our administration. And then other challenges present itself too, such as the diversity of our student population is definitely changing. So another thing that has also kind of altered the landscape of teaching is the internet. You know, back in the day, and I think a lot of us can remember this, and me included, where my professors were the keeper of the knowledge. And that was their job to impart upon me the things I need to know of that subject matter. Now, yes, I could walk over and grab a book or a journal from the library, but the internet has changed that so that we're not the only people that has access to this knowledge. Now, they may not know what they're looking for, but it's out there and we're not the only keepers of it. So the other thing that has changed in education is how we're teaching. You know, we went on this big spree of active learning, and to be perfectly honest, there's a huge debate if lecture is bad, the students are bored, but it's something we need. You know, so our lecturing has actually kind of changed and morphed into a more active learning environment. So all these things. And what do you do with them? It's almost like all these things, you are being approached, you're like a tourist and a vendor on a beach, along a beach walk, with all these instructional strategies and technologies and requirements trying to get you to use this and active learning and flip classroom and do this and do that. So how is it that you know which ways to, or what to choose to better inform your students of your subject matter? And the question becomes, how should you select effective instructional strategies with this confusing environment of all this stuff? And the answer is, so now everybody ready? It's going to become interactive. Okay, I want you to write this down. The answer to how you select effective instructional strategies, number one, remain purposeful. So write that down for a second. Remain purposeful. And base your instructional strategy selections on your intended learning goals, or what do we call those here at Midway? SLOs, okay? So let's talk about remain purposeful, and a particular faculty member comes to my mind, and that's Dr. Patton. Dr. Patton, a couple years ago, I watched you teach methodology to our Meduca people, and you stood up and you talked about purposeful selection of teaching methods. Do you have any words of advice for our faculty members on selecting, remaining purposeful to our teaching?
Well, depending on what you were talking about in ways of concepts or ideas, you just need to make sure that you're remaining focused on your end objective. So you need to keep your objective in mind and not get distracted by too much information or veering off in the wrong direction, including other things that really aren't relevant to what you're discussing. So
yeah, I think the one thing you said is everything that you select to do with your students has to have a purpose. I think was the main point, and that stuck with me, and that's so true. And it's not that we want to second guess ourselves, but we definitely do not want to waste our time or their time by teaching when people aren't learning. So hopefully today, these little ideas that we generate together will kind of push some of that aside. So the 20th century, okay, doesn't change it, changes it, okay. All right, the 20th century produced a significant amount of research and theory building about learning. Now, you have to, I'm going to put a little disclaimer out there because you've got educational learning theories and you have psychological learning theories. And it's not never a twain shall meet. They're kind of woven in and out of each other. One supports the other, one is not the other. So you have to understand when I design instruction, if somebody says, Ellen, I would like you to design instruction. I've designed instruction for health risks in agricultural populations. I designed it for me. I don't know even how to drive a tractor, okay? But as an instructional designer, you're given these little tricks. And so how do I design instruction? I always kind of look number one at my student learning outcomes or learning goals. And then I fall back. I take that Bloom verb out because he's important. Bloom's taxonomy verb. And then I look at the theories that support that verb. And then those theories provide kind of a framework and way to design instruction. And so that's kind of how we're going to go here. And you do have to understand that with all education world, and my TED teachers, faculty members can attest to this, fads come and go in education. And there's fad theories in education too. But you don't want to discredit it because it may work for that one particular instructional event that doesn't really fall in a norm. So unlike the field of physics where things are tested and proven, educational theory, yes, it is a little less guided, but it does help you when thinking about ways to select through and sort through all of these different things that are being presented to you. You should teach like this, you should teach like that. And so, interestingly enough, of course, anytime I see anything on a learning theory, I read it. And a while back, in September of 17, an article came out, and it's through the professional organization POD, P-O-D network. It's faculty development cohort of people all across the world. And then the National Education Association, NEA. They put this article out, and these people researched and did a lit review on learning theories over the course of a span of time. And they came up with kind of 7 discrete types of theories, and those are the ones we're going to discuss today. Now, effective teaching based on these ways of learning that we're going to discuss will be informed first and foremost by your SLOs. So none of this is even important unless you're thinking about and basing it on your SLOs, because that's what we want the students to learn. And so the first question you want to ask yourself is, what are you trying to teach? What is it that I want my students to be able to do? And so you're looking at your SLOs, you're asking those questions, and then you ask, what type of learning do those goals involve? So the way you select a learning strategy is to think like that. What are my goals? What do I want them to be able to do? The performance aspect, that's where your Bloom's taxonomy verb comes in. Do you want them to discuss? Well, they need to be able to tell you about it, okay? And then you select your instructional strategy to support that. I think I'm ready to move on. So pick a course, any course, all righty? Think of courses as we're going through these 7 different ways. Think of your courses that you teach or that you're going to teach. Think of the student learning outcomes that you have for those courses, and then engage in a conversation with me about the ways that we could possibly use these strategies in those classrooms. All right. I don't know what that meant. Okay. So way number one. Are your students learning a skill? Now that little handout I have kind of goes over, these are the 7 ways. Are your students learning a skill where accuracy, precision, efficiency are important? Is it based on a routine set or physical operations? Can it be broken into steps and performed in a right or best way? So you've got steps. These are outcomes are well served by behavioral learning. Now, behavioral learning is based on behavioral psychology. We all know about the dog and the bell and the mouse.
That's classical, not opera.
Oh. Well, we're still training behavior, regardless of which kind. But such skills are best learned when tasks are broken into concrete steps. So think of a class that you teach something, anything, where it's broken down into concrete steps. Not step 1, maybe step 2, but step 1, step 2, step 3, okay? Such skills are best learned when students practice with the support of precise and timely feedback. Now, feedback is really important with this way of learning, because if you're having your students do step by step by step, and you're not providing a feedback for step 2, and they're already on step 7, but they were wrong in step 2, is 7 going to be right? No. So feedback is of utmost importance along the process when you're under kind of thinking about behavioral learning. And here, really, you're just building basic skills, building skills towards your subject. Now, why is feedback so important in this particular way of learning?
You correct misconceptions.
You correct misconceptions.
Because behaviors are the habits. If you do not give feedback, then that habit is
Exactly. So who in here has a class in your mind where you know that you do this type of thing? It doesn't have to, you don't have to think about theory, but you have kind of a task are broken into steps. You're building skills. Gina.
I suggested this parent teachers use interview and what they have to do in that is learn how to code behavior. So we teach definitions, we teach the coding system, I watch videos. It's kind of, it's looking at in terms of like telling the truth, or we might speak into a not characteristic of the person and see if they're lying or whatever. So you don't always use the code behavior. But then we do reliability statistics. See how well they are in agreement. So they're learning research methods as well, and if they haven't been trained to reliably, we continue to be trained. And so they're learning. So it's exactly this, getting feedback, and they're trying to work on definitions and all that, and their understanding.
Oh, exactly. So step-by-step process, feedback strategy is important here. And I think I have an example. A nursing teacher guides students step-by-step in developing the skill to insert a tube in the patient's nose that goes to the stomach. Now, how do you say that, nursing people? Nasal? Okay. Nasogastric tube insertion is a basic skill taught in the fundamentals of nursing course. So how does the teacher use the principles of behavioral learning to teach the skill effectively and efficiently? Or I guess a better question would be, what if they did it? Right? All right. So the second way of learning. I need to make sure. Okay, here it is. Do your students need to learn new ideas, new terminology, or useful theories? let's say, figure out how something functions or understand and retain information. These learning outcomes are best served by cognitive learning. Now, cognitive learning preceded what we call, in my little world, human-computer interaction, and where everything is part of a process. Computers process, humans process, that sort of thing. And so this particular theory came to life, and then all of a sudden, technology and education was born, and they kind of merged these two theories together. Because, again, think about, I'll explain that here in a minute, why they're so closely related. Cognitive learning is based on the psychology of how people pay attention to, process, and recall information. When instructors use cognitive learning effectively, they get the students' attention. They help them see the overall concepts and connections, and then relate new information to prior information to make meaning out of the new information. Now, there's a whole lot of things going on there, but I want to point out the getting student attention. That is a crucial piece to making this work, okay? Gaining students' attention, and this is kind of why it went over into human-computer interaction, because when you're looking at a website, what is that website trying to do? Get your attention, okay? So Gagné was actually the first theorist that I fell in love with. He had 9 steps of instruction, and the first step is gain attention. If you don't gain attention, what happens? Nothing. You get nothing. So how do some of you all get your students' attention?
What this makes me realize in a nutshell is how important, we discussed it with nursing, but how important AMP2 is to their success in nursing. Because in AMP2, we take them from linear thinking to showing interrelationship with systems.
Yes.
And get them ready to go right to nursing.
So it sounds like to me AP1 is your terminology kind of behavioralistic. AP2 connects all those people together, and that's going to be cognitive learning as far as the systems pieces are concerned, and then we're going to do another one here in a little bit that might fit a little bit better with mental models. But gaining attention, how do you all gain your students' attention? Kim Parker Brown, I'm glad you answered this one, because I know
You pose a question.
you pose a question.
You pose a question about what you want to teach. And usually with middle schoolers, they like all that blood and guts stuff. So the more gory you can get with the topic, it gains their attention. In college, what gets students' attention is you may start talking about why are the cartoons important? How does the cartoon teach children to learn? So you start the thinking process, because now I'm not thinking about the cartoon as entertainment for me. I'm thinking of it as a teaching tool.
Caroline.
Another thing that I do to try to get students' attention and to make them focus on the topic is to get it to relate to them personally. Because a lot of the stuff that I do is more abstract. So I have to try to get it down to something that they can personally relate to as part of their actual lives. And then I can take it up to where I want.
I think a lot of times we may be like, let's hurry up and get to our content without taking that small amount of time to gain our students' attention. And that affects how much they retain. So let's talk about the online learning environment. How do we gain attention there? Because that poses a different set of problems. Let's think about that and talk about that as a group. So let's do that real quick. Each table, come up with something, some way we can help our colleagues gain the attention of our online learners. You got about a minute. Go.
Yeah, that's
All right, 10 seconds. All right, let's start with kind of an AHR table over there. What do you guys say? How do you gain attention in the online environment? Right.
And they feel like they have a connection with each other, it's really a class, not an individual student.
So using Zoom once a week, just to kind of physically touch base with your students. That's an excellent suggestion. What about over here?
Discussion forums. We, one of the things we do is, number one, it creates a community of like, amongst class. But we have, rubrics that we use where they require to cite from a text a certain number of times while integrating the personal experience, professional experience. And so that's the way to draw from prior knowledge and extend it with the reading recognized. And then they just springboard off each other. So like we require 4 direct quotes, clear practicing skills. And then integration of professional experience. And then 2 minutes of keyboard experience.
Excellent.
And it goes down to that.
Okay. How about this table here? Delphina, how do you get your students' attention? Yeah.
We have colorful pictures, colorful diagrams, figures, just like that.
Right. That's true. He has a great point here, and this is something to think about, especially as you get into that third section where it's web enhancing your course and talking about the layout of your page. He's like, we use pictures to gain students' attention. Visual stimulation is a huge attention getter. I mean, I could think of some very inappropriate things I could show you, and you would pay a lot better attention than me. But I'll just make that point and not act on it. All right, here we go. What about this table?
Some of the points have already been mentioned, posing questions and relating those to the personal and nursing practice experiences.
I think that's bridging that personal experience where you're going to be personally, professionally, bridging that connection there is a cool way to like join things together for your students, and they're going to pay attention because they're going to see, oh, this does relate to me and she does care about me. Eating table back here. Okay.
This half of the table would like to just say sex.
Oh, mercy. Sex gets people's attention.
It does. Theology.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to share a question related to this. In intro and non-major biology, we start talking about reproduction. But in A&P2, which I want also, we spent the whole semester in A&P1 making connections. Because it's really hard to do one at a time, not let them put them in a box, because now we'll get the first step. So my last question on my final A&P2 every year is, like me, a story about how these two logistics work together. And here's what comes to your book, right? And I usually get the easy, cardiovascular respiratory time. This year, I got a very detailed description of the topics that I did not cover, which was interaction between the valence and molecular.
You obviously got their attention. So we have, so the two factions, faction A says sex. What does faction B say?
This is recorded.
Yeah. I think that's, again, that visual stimulation. We'll just say stimulation. All right, yes, ma'am. Yes.
From student perspective, I think attention is very personal. You know, and for instance, Becky's attention system is completely different than mine. I like problems and, you know, puzzles and stuff, but she's more into, for instance. And, how can we make it so personally attention? Because as a teacher, you need to know your students
Right,
to tap that attention.
right.
It's not a generic thing, you know, just pose a question. It's great ideas, but sometimes it doesn't work on me.
Well, okay, I have a suggestion there, and then Ken, you can follow up. Like, what I would do is kind of vary the types of attention-getting strategies that you're using. So one day, and it also depends on the level of your course. You know, when my advanced geometry students would roll on into the classroom, my attention getter was a puzzle on the board. When my math strategy students roll in my classroom, of those of which who have a 3rd or 4th grade level of reading, you know, I had on BET because that got their attention. They were more into watching those videos and getting riled up, and then you turn the TV off and then you get started. So that wasn't even subject related. I just needed to get their attention somehow. So there's different, I don't think one is tried and true. I do think you need to vary it. I think it's a little unreasonable to ask in a classroom of 30 different ways to gain attention. So I would just kind of go with majority rules here. And then if you have somebody who's not paying attention, that's where you can do the physical thing. Like, hey, how's it going?
But you say online class and through the online class.
Through the online class,
Use the computer, and I feel so alienated
Yeah.
and lonely. So that's why I want my personal attention.
right.
That's why, I mean, in
And I would think in an online environment too, that would be a good place for personalized attention, meaning you respond on a post, I respond directly back to you. That sort of thing. Kim?
I think it's real important that the relationship piece, building a relationship, you have to know your audience when you're teaching, not just as a group, but as individuals. And I think online, when we respond back to a student's post from the discussion question, that gives them that personal time. And then you as the instructor gain knowledge about that person.
Mm-hmm.
I know for myself, in most of my courses, I always pose a question that alludes to that, so that people will bring forth background about themselves,
Right.
so that helps me understand who I'm dealing with.
How do you guys get attention?
That's when I don't teach online, so.
It doesn't have to necessarily be online at this point. We can.
So we had the conversation with Chris. We talked a lot about things that have already been mentioned about posing questions online and getting the students to give their feedback and their experiences. Steph and I talked about a lot of boring stuff, and that gives our students.
It's not just elementary education, I promise you that.
Yeah.
Score and blood and guts and.
Well, I mean, just a live animal is an
Yeah,
attention
we
getter.
and video. I mean, we do a lot of videos, like my computer class, I start every class with a video.
Yeah.
We talk about different breeds, the kids love looking up different breeds and what they're known for.
Right.
And they remember that, you know, it's fun, but they also feel like, oh yeah, that's the one that does that thing, you know.
Excellent. A few things, and then we're going to go on to number 3. You know, helping your students, strategies to help your students see the overall connection, the discussion that Katie just had about how each system is related. It sounds like, your strategies there are working and you're getting some excellent feedback on your exam. One thing I want to point out, in I would say 95% of the theories that have been concocted about how people come to know things, 95% of them support relating new information to prior information. I mean, that's just, if we're learning something unfamiliar, it's unfamiliar for a reason, and it's because we don't know it. But if we attach it to something that we're familiar with, we're more likely to understand the overall connection. So that is really important as you start designing instruction and thinking about instructional strategy selection, is will this instructional strategy pull from something they already know and connect it to what it is I'm trying to teach them. All right, we're skipping the think abouts because we just did that. Okay, number 3. We just have to go to 7. Moving right along here. All righty, which one is this? Learning through inquiry. Yeah, okay, I'm on this page now. I didn't label my slides. It just says slide 10. Well, I have no idea what number that is. Okay, do your goals involve students being aware of and improving their own thinking? Do they need to criticize information, evaluate arguments, evidence, or reason? Does this learning involve creative thinking or appreciate other people's thinking? So think of a course that you teach that supports this type of learning, this way of learning. These outcomes are best served by learning through inquiry, based on theories of critical and creative thinking, classical philosophy, I think we call him Socrates. And learning through inquiry involves the instructor asking probing questions to model and make the thinking process visible. When I read that phrase, make the thinking process visible, like just take a second. Make the thinking process visible. That's a really hard thing to do. That really is. And according to, based on the fundamentals of learning through inquiry, it's our questions that make that process visible to the students. So we're asking them questions, they're thinking and answering, and now all of a sudden, the thought process that wasn't even there is now visible. How do you get to that point? Think about it. How do you get to that point with your students? How do you make that process visible? What types of questions do you ask? I think it's a difficult thing to even express.
You have to know to think critically about. There's not just one static question. It has to be related to the subject area, context. Yeah.
Let's talk about effective questioning techniques. What are some? Have you thought about your level of questioning? Yes.
So this one that I use is the 5 whys.
The 5 whys.
You know what I mean? Like, why is this happening? Okay, then why did that happen? And then why did that happen?
Oh,
So you
okay.
finally get down to the real reason.
Oh, okay. That's excellent. Why did that happen? Well, why did that happen? I hate it when my own children ask me those ones. Katie.
Brings up my ethics class. We talk about ethical issues in science, and we do it all case-based, the whole semester. Every case is broken down to what is the ethical question, what are the ethical issues, who are the stakeholders, what are the possible outcomes. And by starting to guide them through that process in the beginning of the semester, focusing on one question at a time, they kind of get to a point where they're, by the end of the semester, really capable of thinking broadly about the case.
Mhm.
The stakeholders is what really catches them. Because everyone reads it the first time, oh yeah, I know, this is black and white, this is not ethical, this is ethical. You know, so then, oh, well, who else is involved that might be interested in the outcome of this? And, yeah, so my goal is to make everyone change their mind at least 5 times this semester.
Yes, sir.
You have to model it as well. I mean, when I'm up there working the problem, they have to see me ask the questions. What do I need to know? What is this? So because when you solve a problem, you're asking it questions. How do I proceed here? How is this piece of information used, and so on. And so you have to model that.
I like that. When you're solving a problem, you're asking it questions. That's a really, I wish I had that in my pocket.
But I love asking critical thinking questions because there are so many times when you actually get a feeling for the way they evaluate, or they look at something differently than what I would have looked at it. And so I actually then learn from them.
Right.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, it really is. So in order for this to work, the instructors must understand the thinking process that we're trying to make visible. Yes.
When we're teaching questioning
Mm-hmm.
to students, it's also a good way to model
Mm-hmm.
how they should ask a question.
Right.
So using it that way as well.
And particularly open to questions when there is no other knowledge. And students kind of go crazy when I keep saying things like, yes, and, yes, and. No, I just want an answer.
I seem to be focusing a lot on A&P2, but it's really a good course because what we do in there is we indicate to them, this is what happens normally. The fun part is what happens if normality doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
That's the cool part. So we teach them how to critically think
Yeah.
that way.
Well, and I want to kind of touch on what Katie said, where, you know, at the beginning of the semester, you're asking the probing questions so that they can formulate and critically think. And hopefully by the end of the semester, they're doing that piece on their own. And I think that needs to be thought of by all of us as we go in and start selecting instructional strategies or designing courses is, you know, we a lot of times get caught up in the content. They have to know what an arm is or what addition is, you know, but what about the thinking processes that we're also training that are applicable in our profession, but maybe not necessarily in that particular subject or topic or chapter or lesson?
One thing we talked about, you know, wanting students to look up those articles, and the more articles they get, and so on and so forth. But what do they do with those articles once they have them? You know, a lot of times they just swallow it and regurgitate it in some way into your paper. But what we need them to do is to read those articles critically and to vet those sources and to not just follow what they're being told, but to ask those probing questions that say, oh, well, who is he to say that? You know, where is he coming from? Does he have a bias? Where's your follow the money? You know, what point are they trying to make? What devices are they using to make that point, to get that across, to persuade you? Are you persuaded? Why or why not? You know,
What's their methodology?
exactly. I mean, before they even get to using that article in the research that they plan to do. And I think a lot of times they skip that entirely. And then it really takes, you know, it begs the question because it takes that article, that information, and applies it when maybe it's not applicable at all.
Deconstructing your research.
Exactly.
That's even more than that. I love that idea because what happens is they can read these journal articles, but they need to be able to see the links between the 5 articles that they read.
There are a lot of informational literacy strategies for that.
Did you have something to?
Well, and I think it kind of applies to what you're talking about here, making it visible. I like to use case studies in my class and getting them to, you know, apply A&P and apply the disease process, and then asking them, you know, and even do it as a group as a case study. So they're learning from each other
Mhm.
and then saying, okay, if you have a patient with this disease process, what do they look like? Tell me what they look like. So they're
Mhm.
actually describing what they're seeing, and they do learn more from each other sometimes.
Right.
Bringing those ideas.
Well, and I do think the learning through inquiry, it is, and you can disagree with me, but I think it is our job as instructors is to teach them that so that they learn through inquiry on their own. So that they're not relying on our questions, they're able to develop their own.
And this has to do with differences across generations. We were just talking about identifying race across articles. I gave my students a template, an article sending template, and I asked them to identify race. Every single one of the students who grew up with the internet started teaching from race, like actual website,
URL,
and
web addresses.
So I needed to change the language to these.
Yeah. Oh, the littlest thing, huh? Not that kind of link. That's awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, number 4. A lot of what we've been talking about, and Keely, yours is kind of your case studies and stuff, is making me think of learning with mental models. And mental models, all right. Okay, here it is. I probably just need to check these off. I'm not doing a good job paying it. Y'all are you're gaining my attention, and I'm forgetting where I am when I look back down. Okay, so do your students need to solve problems or make decisions? So you're thinking of a course that you teach or going to teach or are a manager of. Do your goals involve finding and defining problems, generating solutions, and evaluating and choosing among solutions? Must students weigh the values of different options and predict outcomes? So goals such as these are best served by learning with mental models based on theories of decision-making and problem-solving. Now, I will say the mental model kind of theory base influenced Piaget and his kind of thoughts about how children come to know things. Is the world is modeled in different ways. And we point those models out to the students who then process and form knowledge and models of their own. So when instructors effectively use this way of learning, they set up appropriate practice opportunities. You help students identify and apply mental models to make decisions, and you facilitate to keep their focus on the process, not just the outcome. And I think a lot of times we get caught up in the outcome-driven land of teaching. You know, get your problems done, get your paper done. I mean, that's an outcome, right? But what about the process that we're developing as we go through creating that outcome? That's just as important, because really that's what they're going to carry on, is the process. They're not going to carry that paper, I'm sorry. I mean, they may, I don't know. They may cart your test around.
No, I mean, that's what I thought the whole process is.
Yeah.
We can fill them with book knowledge, day one to whatever. The idea is to make them independent thinkers. That's what's important to me.
So when you have you're solving a problem, or you have a lot of elements within your situation, providing models for your students. Mental models are fundamental in organization in the brain and reasoning. So as an instructor, the things you can control when you're working with instruction here, when designing instruction, there are 2 things that you can control as an instructor. Number 1, you've got to control the number of models, mental models you're throwing at your students, because they only have so much working memory, okay? So if you're like, this, and you've gone past their working memory, they're done paying attention to you. Okay, so you can control that through your design of your teaching. The other thing you need to control, that you can control, is logical failure. So you're going to provide all of these mental models, all these case studies, and then your student draws a wrong conclusion because model number one, they didn't quite get that concept. So your job as instructor is to pay attention and to facilitate and redirect that logical breakdown where their reasoning, it's one of those times where you look at your students like, what? That's not making sense to me. But it's because somewhere down the line, one of their models was a little misconstrued. What other ways have you used mental models or we've got all kinds of case study people in here, that I know for sure. And labs, those are models of what's really happening out there. So I think this is a viable thing to probably further our discussion in what types of other things besides case studies or labs, project-based learning. That's another one. And how do we assess these things? Would be things that we could further our discussion on. All right, number 5. I'm flipping the page, so this one should be pretty easy to know. Okay, so you're thinking of a class. Do your learning outcomes involve changing opinions, attitudes, or creating an awareness of multiple perspectives? That's what we're talking about. Do you want students to deal with feelings or cultivate empathy? Do you need to build teamwork or collaboration skills? These learning outcomes are best served by learning through groups and teams. Based in human communication and group counseling theory, learning through groups builds on dynamics formed by teams. Now, there's also plenty of research done on 21st century skills and collaborations that we've got. Our people have to learn when they leave here to collaborate and work with other people. That's just the way the world works. Now we're too connected with the interwebs for us not to collaborate. It is most effective when instructors carefully design, orient, prepare, monitor, and facilitate. Groups and teams is a lot of labor on your instructor side. So the design process in these group pieces really takes some tender, mindful thought. You can't just throw them out there, and then it turns into a classroom management mess.
But it works great if your classes are small.
Yeah, if your classes are small, it works wonderfully. So when have you used learning through groups and teams in your classes? Yes,
We
ma'am.
do a lot of simulation and nursing.
Yeah.
Team
So simulations in nursing. Who else has used groups or teams in the design of their instruction?
I have one of my special ed courses where they're given a student and limited information, and then they've got to build a program.
And what is the biggest challenge you find in developing these?
Getting organized in a group of people,
Yeah.
especially online.
Yeah, that's what I kind of want to bring this to the conversation. I did an online group project last semester. I'm going to say successfully for the first time, but it wasn't without its failures, where people just in the online environment do not participate in group work. It didn't matter what I said or how I rearranged things. It was either they were going to have to turn in an individual project, or I wasn't going to take their project and they were going to fail, and that just blows the whole retention thing out the water. So, okay, you can turn in an individual one. Okay, here, this group does one. So what are ways, has anybody in here done online group work and online teamwork with your students? And how has that gone? Because we all could learn from anybody that has done successful online group work.
I think you have to have a set of guidelines for them to go by, so that they know what the expectation is.
Mm-hmm.
Each student in the group, they have to come up with a plan,
Mm-hmm.
and who's doing what. That way you see that everybody's involved in that. This past semester, I had a student email me and say, this student refused to be involved in, the
Mhm.
team. And so I said, you all go on and do.
That's exactly what I had to do.
The rest of you do the work. And I emailed the person who was refusing. When I did not get a response back, that led me to believe that person did not want to do it, did not want to partake. So that person's grade became the zero.
Yeah.
In that group.
Caroline.
Along those same lines, for the class that I teach at UK, it is entirely project-based. And one of the things that we do is, for each different stage of the process of the project, we define group roles. And some of them are functional, like this person is going to be the note taker, this person is going to be the person who puts it together technologically, whatever. But each role has been thought out by us as a teaching team to be a relatively equal part for each person, but the whole thing can't be completed unless everybody takes part of it. And that really kind of forces them to do it. And then we hold them responsible.
I think another way to think about it, and this would be a learning for me, our students have to do an action research project, and when it gets to doing the data analysis, 95% of them struggle. So I started holding these tutorials, and it was really cool to watch the interaction when you had 4 people looking at one piece of data, because they problem solve together. So although that's not a traditional type of group project, it became a way of doing group things, problem solving.
Right.
And you can totally set that up in Zoom. You don't have to have it be set at a particular time. You can set up a Zoom room that's always open.
And that's how I ran my, when I did I teach an online class, and we did the group work, and each group had their own Zoom room, and it was open at all times, and they could go in, and they set their own schedule. I required, you have to meet once a week, so I could see that they were meeting once a week or not. But that really, that facilitated the project.
Yeah,
They love it.
Mhm.
It's like we get 2 opportunities to just actually see somebody else's face.
yeah, and build that learning community.
And
that you
talk to a
mentioned.
friend. Yeah, talk to a friend.
So that getting them to participate is something you have to consider, and that all is driven by the design of your group project. I don't want to get into answering this question, but other types of things you have to think about when you're working with groups or teams. How does the teacher manage these groups and ensure civil discourse? So what happens if a group goes awry? This is actually one of the things we talked about in our Faculty Development Advisory Board, is how do you have these difficult conversations with your students when things start going awry. So groups and teams, while complicated, can be very beneficial, and we know for a fact that our students are going to need to be able to collaborate in their professions when they leave Midway. So it's kind of one of those, man, it's just kind of a pain, but gosh, we have to do it. And it's something we need to strive to develop in all of our courses, or at least in our programs, where our students are collaborating and working with each other in some capacity. All right, we're on number 6, almost done. So you're thinking of a course that falls, or student learning objective, SLO, that falls under this. Do your students need to develop professional judgment within a variety of contexts? is this best practiced in a safe environment? Do your students need to gain confidence and competence in complex situations? I was reading about learning through virtual realities, and I'm going to clarify that for you here in a minute. And the two that popped out of my head is criminal justice and our student teaching, the classes that Dr. Patton manages, field experience, methods courses, whatever they're called. I just know the numbers from Moodle. 97. Y'all's courses don't have names, they have numbers in my brain. So these learning outcomes are best served by learning through virtual realities. Now, I want you to think about this real quick. This way of learning is not limited to virtual reality. We're not all walking around with goggles on, okay? I'm not talking about just the type of virtual reality where you're plugged in. It's just anything that is virtually real. So real, but not really. So Sarah may have her students practice an arresting technique for criminal justice. Well, they're not really arresting their classmates, so that's kind of a virtual reality. So it's those types of things. Their roots in psychodrama, sociodrama, and gaming theory. Gaming plays a huge piece here with learning through simulations and that sort of thing. Virtual realities often run themselves, but the instructor must suspend, support, and debrief student experience. What I've noticed in all the theories that we are discussing, in every piece, we started out talking about how important feedback from the instructor was in behavioral. Okay, that's the feedback here. Feedback again. And in each piece, there's a feedback loop and a facilitation loop that we are, as instructors, required to provide to our students in order to make sure they're learning. Instructors can carefully design or select the roles, scenarios, or games that have the most potential. So you don't want them doing something virtually real that isn't real at all. So those types of pieces, again, I think this is easier to facilitate than, let's say, a group dynamic per se, but finding that perfect balance between real and not real, real but really not, it's not going to serve its purpose if it seems so far-fetched that it's not real. But then again, you can't throw people down in the middle of I guess can you? Like, or, the horses. Like, you can't operate on every one of your horses. So you got to come up with a different, way to do those things. So practicing professional judgment. How do you all do that? How do you learn that way in your course?
So in one of our equine rehab classes, the instructor comes up with scenarios, and so we'll have usually we have there was a rehab professional interview for the student, techniques and relationships and discussing. Usually we have the client or an owner of a horse, will actually have a horse out there, and then we usually throw in an additional person. Sometimes maybe it is a farm manager who may or may not be unhappy with their job. We had students, and it worked out really well. We had a student very fluent in Spanish, and her position actually ended up being a horse handler who did not speak English, only spoke Spanish. And we're all nobody really knows, like, other than who the rehab person is going to be. They don't know the role the other people are playing in their group. And then they have to work through assessing the horse, coming up with a treatment plan for the horse, and dealing with what could be a very hysterical owner or someone who can't speak English. So they've got to try to figure out how to get the point across.
That's awesome.
They work really well. Sometimes I just go to watch them just because they're quite fun, and they're actually really entertaining as kind of not the instructor, but just kind of to see what goes on. And we sometimes can put in as part of the scenario, and that's also fun to find. So
That stuff sounds great. I want to watch.
Yeah,
Let me know when that
I mean,
goes
they,
down.
they stress out a lot.
Yeah.
When they know it's today, they have to do it, but then when they get into the reflection and discussing what
Mhm.
works and what didn't, it's been really helpful.
I think Janice just pointed out something that really needs to be, and that's the word reflecting. What good do these role play simulations, scenarios, and games do if we're not having our students think about what they just went through? That means they're just going through it. They're not learning from it, or they may pick up a few things, but they're not really internalizing exactly what they went through. And we can all agree here, writing it down is a lot different than saying it. So really internalizing it and getting inside what we've learned. All right, we got one more, and then we're done. Okay, experiential learning. So you're thinking of a class, and this may or may not apply to everybody. Okay, all right. Do your students need to get immersed in real life work, service, or travel? Do your learning goals involve reflecting on and making meaning out of such an experience? These learning outcomes are best served by experiential learning. Experiential learning has its own theory base, but it is also informed by cognitive neuroscience, findings that show that learning is a natural, multisensory process that emerges out of experiences. Let's see, situated learning, experience learning, that's one of the things. The problem-based module that you're going to go into Moodle, problem-based scenarios where you have them based on real life sort of thing, that's all grounded in situated learning or experiential theory. It's built on Dewey, actually. He kind of started that role, and then as our experiences are able to be more varied as we become more technological, this theory has kind of grown out of that soil. And it started with Kolb is a real big guy, real big theorist there, where he breaks down experiential learning into a cycle. You have an experience, a concrete experience that you know of, that you participated in. And after you participated in that experience, or while you're participating, you're observing and reflecting on it. Now, from that observation and reflection, you yourself internally are making abstract concepts, extracting the learning and making it now your own. And then the last step of that is applying it to a new experience. But if you think about it that way, it's back to prior knowledge, new knowledge, attaching something that you don't know to something that you already know, or attaching something that you haven't experienced yet, but because you've experienced this, you'll know you're going to do that. So all of this piece, all of this is kind of what experiential learning is about. So to use this way of learning effectively, and we've hit on this multiple times in our conversation today, which I have thoroughly enjoyed. Instructors have to match students to their experiences. So again, knowing your customer, knowing your student, I say customer because one of the first steps they teach you in instructional design world is you got to know your client. When I was making a health of agricultural populations course, that's not anything that I knew. I had to get to know my client in order to produce that course. So getting to know your students is critical in the matching them into an experience that they'll learn from and that they'll benefit from. And then the second role, again, is the faculty as facilitator. You've got to push the students beyond their superficial reactions. And so that's the next and probably last question I want to ask you. How do you push your students to go beyond a superficial reaction to an experience? Becky?
Well, study abroad, of course, is the prime example here, but it can also be just building
Mhm.
Because whenever you study something in class, I don't care how thoroughly you do it, how exciting it is or not, it cannot compare with actually being at the site. And every time students will say, like the Irish Studies class, that we studied about the troubles in Northern Ireland, and then we went to Belfast, and we saw the murals, and we saw the bullet holes, and you know, they were just brimming over. And the people who went on the trip who did not take the class, and they've been warned, they weren't prepared for it, they didn't know how to process it, they didn't know how to put it in, you know, context or anything. The students who went, it just, everything just, you know, came full circle with them. And like we're hoping, like with the Holocaust studies and going, you know, we can read about the concentration camps, we can watch those movies. If you go to Dachau and you stand there and you smell that still, it changes you. It really does. There's nothing to compare to it. And I'm saying this out loud because, you know, our program is in danger of being able to continue because we have lack of financial support. And we've got to have it. And, you know, not just for Sarah and me, but for anybody that wants that kind of experience for their students and or themselves, you know, help us.
So let me ask you this. Let's say you do have an experience where your students are in, they've learned it before. I'm not necessarily saying study abroad, I'm saying any experience, okay? But they're still not passing that superficial line of really truly getting that experience. How do you pull your students past that line?
It has to be staff members very, very carefully. And a key element in this is very emotional caretaking. Because anytime, whether it's in nursing or teaching or criminal justice, wherever, I don't like using the metaphor of pushing, I prefer the metaphor of scaffolding and supporting, because when a person believes a challenge, their world frame starts to break apart. And when we have a class on inequity, social justice issues, and you know, a lot of our students are in some of the poorest districts in the state. So I want them, when they take this course, to understand that kids coming through poverty is a social justice issue. It's a matter, it's not just an acceptable way of life that these kids or their families are to blame for. You know, does that make sense? So the reading materials we choose are very intentional. The adjunct teaches it. It's chosen very intentionally because she's been teaching for over 20 years and is very sensitively handle this stuff. But in some of our more rural communities, or people who begin to think outside of their normal community, they were being ostracized. So how do you scaffold that critical thinking and not put them at risk of being ostracized, but get them to understand political implications in your lifelong education, particularly with AI, robotics, and using so many of the service level jobs. A lot of the kids that our teachers teach will not be eligible for work by the years 2030, 2040. It's not even that far if they can only do fundamental data and reading and math steps. They won't be able to find work.
And I definitely agree. Like, we got to push them past their thing. And I'm kind of thinking about nursing a little bit. Like, if you can't get them past that superficial reaction, they can't do it. Like me, I would be on the ground, passed out. And you'd be like, Ellen, you can't be a nurse. I'm like, you're right. Like, I would not pass the superficial.
Yeah, it's that critical thinking of learning information, but you have to be able to apply it.
Right.
You get past the learning, it's
Right.
really applying it.
Right.
And part of that goes right back to our initial discussions where we were talking about providing feedback to them too. One of the things that our nursing teaching and learning course does is have, there's an exercise built in there where students spend a weekend reacting totally, the whole weekend to living as a diabetic and all their decisions on that, and then reflecting on that experience.
That's an excellent experiential learning. And it reminds me of what Midway 101, what Natasha had her students do. Dress up with a disability. My mom does actually the same thing. Yes, sir.
They have to find three conditions of interest to go in this day and general testing. They contact somebody of one of those three and ask more about it.
That's
That is when they realize you graduate from whatever program, from whatever school, for example, the state level, it goes for 5 weeks. Now, they come community and they do strip searches for students about how they interact with the public.
Mhm.
No, we can't.
I think that's a great point to make with an online experience. I mean, you don't have that face-to-face contact to say, hey, or, you know, a person coming in or traveling together. So they have to kind of do it themselves. John?
Elizabeth will kick in immediately here. It's one thing to learn, for example, how to identify reptiles, amphibians, bird mammals from pictures. It's a whole nother issue to take them out in the field to see all the nuances of identification.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we push them past that? We teach them what to look for, but then we finally go into the background and they have to make the decision as to what they think they're looking at.
What species it is.
In the field.
Mm.
Well, and I have an example from the environmental science methods class that I taught. Environmental science methods could be a million different things, and environmental scientists can do a lot of different kinds of activities and jobs. So I took them out to learn what does somebody do if they're doing GIS and making maps and thinking about the environment of a whole area, or pollution control. We went to look at the wastewater treatment plants, or we looked at managing wildlife habitat using prescribed fires. And that was kind of interesting because the students in my class were Panamanians. In their experience, fire was used to destroy wildlife habitat in order to burn down the rainforest so they can make farms. But we use it here more for, well, they do use it for farming, but it's also for improving habitat for a lot of ground nesting birds, for example.
Mm.
So I basically tried to take the course and give them an overview of all the different kinds of things that an environmental scientist might do. And we went out and worked with different people or saw people at work and saw the different things that they actually do on the job.
That's interesting that you had that different global perspective coming into that experience. That's awesome.
Right.
Regarding the emotional experience and going beyond the superficial reactions, as a tool of reality is the key, and they'll change the whole history of the immersive environment. Whereas in the philosophy, you just in that environment, it's going to be a gas chamber in the NASA camp, and I've seen people crying and crying and crying wearing the virtual reality because it's so immersive, so in there. It's going to be an ethical issue, or a psychological issue, because you are hacked. Your perception, your physical environment is just upside down.
Yeah.
You're living that one. So if you're thinking about that kind of experience, virtual reality is one of your choices. It should be.
Well, that's all I have. Again, I appreciated that conversation, and I was kind of hoping that's the way it was going to be. I wanted us to share what we do. I wanted, everybody to hear what other people were doing, and I wanted to learn some things too, because I might be standing up here, but nobody's ever a perfect teacher. Okay, we can always get better. So a couple of things. Now we're going to delineate into 3 specific instructional strategies in Moodle. The administration will be in there. We will facilitate the course. Again, the expectations are that you participate. And then don't forget on February 2nd, come to our Lunch and Learn, and let's kind of define how we want faculty development programming to grow, not to be, but to grow at Midway University. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon. And take some bagels back with you or whatever you guys need. Yeah, I have a good time. Thank you. I love what you do too. I tried, Dr. Filipino. Thank you.
Let me just read what I got this morning.
I can.
Okay, this is coming from the what happened? We all well, on this one, the rest of he's not going to
Okay, that's just better than
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry that they Well, yeah, well, you can always talk to me. What I'm gonna do is go back. Thanks, guys. So I looked at this first one. So I have to go back now. Well, okay, then I would have to create another one. All right, so Rich should I know?
Thank you for letting me know. I'll tell you, maybe we can start local field trips. Like, I'm thinking about
I'm gonna leave the rest of you on schedule no place. It's just, you know, I haven't really done anything. I haven't done it before. Yeah, I know. I got a problem, I gotta get the food.
Yeah, you
I know this is like the perfect time. We can't let each other get away.
I didn't say.
part of me like.
I'm just gonna go through first and try to figure out how to go ahead and change dates.
Yeah, yeah. Just let me know. Let me know. Happy to help.
I told my sister though, when I lived in Syracuse, every day I would have to wear snow pants on because there would be 4 to 6 inches of snow on my car. I'm like, well, it's not that bad.
It could be worse.